All right, so we're going to start on, or we're going to continue our discussion on perfect competition. So the kind of the trick here and what we're going to look at and continue to focus in on, I want to make sure that I give you guys the notes, but then again, understanding too that this is a lot of brand new information over new things that you haven't seen before. And so what I'm going to try to do is, today is going to be a lot kind of note heavy. Tomorrow we're going to do some FRQ practice and maybe a few more like additional notes after that FRQ practice. And then Monday we'll finish up any perfect competition notes like the shutdown rule and that. And then Monday and Wednesday for you guys of next week we'll do a lot more FRQ practice. So that's kind of the goal of here. So we'll interrupt the vast amount of notes that you guys are taking with a lot of FRQ practice. And also make sure, please, that tomorrow you guys have a quiz over the next problem set. Please print out the problem set or bring a laptop or whatever in order to access that, because that'll be some good practice as well. So again, the idea of this is you guys have to practice it in order to get good at it. Just simply dumping the notes and being like, good luck, isn't a very good functional way to actually get you guys to find success on the AP test. So I'm going to do a lot of practice during the next few days. So please make sure you're printing out the problem sets. Your guys' test on this, on perfect competition, is until Thursday. But hopefully by that time you guys will have a bunch of FRQ practice and stuff like that, where the FRQs on the test should go really easy. You'll have 2 FRQs on this test over perfect competition. All right, with all that said, when I saw you guys last on, was Monday, we finished off with the idea of the MRDARP line. And again, that's the way I'm going to refer to it as. They don't ask usually for your average revenue line, but because it's easy to remember the labeling by calling it the MRDARP line, this is what we're going to go ahead and do. All right, and hopefully you guys are ready to, you've got like colored pencils and that. I think that's helpful during this time. The one dot, I guess, and I'll wait to actually have you guys label it. All right, so one thing that I tell all my classes to do is the very first question on most, if not every FRQ that I've seen that deals with any kind of market structure, and they're usually perfect competition or monopoly. Those are the 2 market structures. They've had a few now monopolistic competition graphs on there, but typically it's those 2 big ones. Is the very first question of anyone that I've seen always asks, so what's the profit maximizing quantity? That's usually the very first thing they ask. So I would say that every other question stems from you knowing MR equals MC. So what I would strongly suggest that you do is put a big old fat dot where MR equals MC. So it's the red one on the PowerPoint, but if you're drawing in your notes, like I would make sure to make that dot really big. When you get your FRQ, I would do the exact same thing. Before you even read the question, I would just find where MR equals MC on the graph and just put a dot there, because almost every other question stems then from that, unless they change something up, in which case then you're going to have a new MR equals MC. So just big fat dot, because again, it gets kind of jumbled with a lot of different lines on the graph. It can get confusing rather quick. But if you always have that kind of anchor point of MR equals MC, then you can always start over there. And most questions you have to start over there as you get kind of further into like the D, E, and F part of the longer questions. Yeah?
Okay, so where MR equals MC, your marginal cost per unit has gone up, but not to a point where it's too far past it?
Yes, and what by it you mean your marginal revenue?
By your marginal revenue and the price.
In this case, yeah, the price. It's going to be different in a different market structure that we'll look at. But for competition, you're exactly right. Okay, and the best way, because a lot of people see this, and again, if you were given numbers and you work backwards, that's why in the problem sets I like grading those that deal with what's your profit at this particular. You notice that your profit's the highest, or MR equals MC. And the reason for that is it's not costing you any extra to produce the new thing. And even though you might be getting more revenue for producing the next unit, then your extra costs start to far outweigh your extra gain or profit in that, or your extra revenue. So MR equals MC is where you profit maximize, okay, where your costs are not going up exceedingly more than your revenues. So again, hopefully on the problem sets you've seen that. If not, then we can walk back through a couple of problem sets, and I'm happy to show you that. All right, so again, always put that big old fat dot. Now I'm going to put a lot of labeling on the next graph. So if I were you, because I want you guys to continue to practice this, I would draw another perfectly competitive graph. You don't need to draw the industry graph. You don't need to draw the side-by-side ones, but redraw the firm graph, so the one with the perfectly elastic demand line. The more you draw this, it just becomes second nature. And again, these are graphs you've never seen before, so I'm going to make sure that you guys get a lot of practice on it. Supply and demand, you guys can draw the X, no problem, but perfectly competitive ones are a little bit different. With that being said, too, remember what we're doing here. In the market, all we're doing is whittling it down to the firm. So we're taking the supply line and breaking it apart. And we're seeing then, okay, so now where should a single firm, not the entire market, because the entire market's equilibrium, but where should a single firm produce? How much should a single firm make of that good? We're going to go ahead and add our average total cost line. Now, there are when we add that, there are three different profits. There's two different profits and one other thing that can happen when we add our ATC line. The firm can be earning an economic profit. When you write down breaking even, I want you in parentheses put earning an accounting profit. Earning an accounting profit. And the last one is, this says economic loss. You can't really earn a loss, so you're incurring a loss. That's when we add the ATC curve. So depending on where the ATC curve is, we can tell if an individual firm is earning an economic profit, breaking even, but still earning an accounting profit, or if they're incurring an economic loss. So whenever we throw the word economic, and we don't just say profit loss or breaking even, so whenever we throw economic in front of it, what does that mean? Implicit costs, or which is opportunity costs. So you're exactly right. Okay, you're taking into account the opportunity cost. You still can be making money, all right, and still with zero opportunity costs. And I'll give you an example.
And this is where MC meets ATC.
This is where the quantity that the firm is producing hits ATC. I'll show you that. That's a good question.
That's coming up.
That's coming up. Yeah. So let's pretend for a second that I'm sitting here and I'm pondering a career change because I've had enough of high schoolers, and I think to myself, farming, that sounds easy. You're outside a lot, even though it's either hot or cold. It's definitely not an easy profession. But I think to myself, like, all right, I'm going to make that profession. I start researching and seeing how much like a typical farmer in Colorado earns, and it turns out that they earn the exact same amount that I earned here at Valor, like 25 cents. So I'm like, that sounds like a good thing. So I leave. Now I can be, and I go and I start growing things. I can be taking on an accounting profit. It looks like I can be making money. But then you have to add in like all the other stuff that Valor does, like my benefits, my retirement. We can even talk about utility, although most times in econ, we're talking about this, we're not talking about utility. But that's kind of what behavioral econ is now starting to do. Not necessarily trying to putting utility in, but essentially saying like, okay, so why do people sometimes act in irrational ways? Why would I leave Valor even if I knew I was going to incur an economic loss? Like, why would I leave there? And some of the times it's just like, I've had enough. But that's not a rational reason as to why to leave. But again, behavioral economists are starting to look more at that. Anyways, let's say I'm earning the exact same. My benefits are the exact same. My utilities the exact same, all that kind of stuff. So let's just pretend for a second that that's all the case. If that's all the case, then All right, I'm not earning an economic profit. Okay, my opportunity cost is 0. So if I figured all that stuff out and sitting in this nice heated room with you guys and not having to smell like cow poop, I would probably then stay at my current job. Okay, there's no incentive to move into the farming business because I wouldn't be any better off when you take into all my opportunity costs, all the things that I'd be giving up. And the 1 or 2 of you I actually like I wouldn't get to see you again. All right? I didn't say it was you. Yeah. I mean, to have a foosball table in my own room, that's a pretty big thing to give up right there.
One of those attractive.
That's true. You couldn't put it in a tractor. All right, so we're going to put the ATC line below the price line, and this is a really, really important thing. Okay, a couple of things. First, Sam asked a really good question. Okay, when we're determining loss and profit and all that kind of stuff, where on the ATC are we figuring that out? And the answer back is it's where the amount that you're making, the quantity, hits the ATC line. So you follow the dotted line until it hits the ATC line. So if you start the quantity and you start going up and you hit the ATC line first, you're earning a profit. If you start the quantity and you follow the dotted line up and you hit the price line first, then you're at a loss, and we'll talk about that.
But if you
start at the quantity, don't start at MR. Start at MR equals MC. Drop down to the quantity. Okay, the profit maximizing quantity. And then go back up and see if you hit the ATC line first or the price line first. If you hit them both at the same time, we'll talk about what that is.
Is this economic profit, or does the ATC include opportunity cost?
Great question. So if we're talking about total costs in an economics class, it accounts for opportunity costs.
Oh, okay.
Good question. Yeah.
So if you hit the ATC line first, it's a profit.
Correct.
If you go to the MRDARP line.
You will, and we'll show why. Okay? All right, so again, this is the hard thing about perfect competition. It's like all this information just, here, have it, and now we kind of got to walk backwards and dissect it. Because again, this is the first time we're seeing a graph that looks this funky. All right, so a couple of points that I want to make sure that you guys have labeled. One, notice, and you don't have to label this, just simply notice it, okay? Your ATC and MC line hit at the lowest, where ATC is its lowest. Again, the readers will not sit there with a magnifying glass and see. They're going to just kind of eyeball it. There's a couple of ways to make sure that you always make sure that the ATC line's at its lowest when the MC line hits. One way of doing that is when you draw your MC line, again, since you'll have line paper, okay, draw your ATC line so it hits one of the lines. Another way to do it is to start in the middle of the MC line and just put the ATC line, just kind of go either way like that. That's another way you can do it too.
I don't have that hand-eye coordination to hit the dot.
Hit the dot, I know. You know how long it's taken me to be able to get even somewhat close to.
You've gotten pretty good at drawing lines on vertical surface.
Yeah, it's years and years of AP teaching right there. I've drawn, I don't know how many hundreds, if not thousands of these things. So, and just notice that, again, doesn't have to be perfect, but make sure it's close. Because the graders are, again, they're looking for, again, not perfection, but they're looking for, are you close? The other dot that's not labeled on here is MC at its lowest point. So your Nike swoosh, where it hits its lowest point, that's where diminishing return sets in. That is a question that's been on the AP test, and it's starting to get to be more and more common. Diminishing return sets in where MC is at its lowest. So an FRQ question, or it could even be a multiple choice question, is at what quantity does diminishing returns set in? And that can be on any graph. It's where the MC is at its lowest. You just follow that quantity down. The reason being is, think about it. We'll use the Mod Pizza example again. I went in there the other day. It's the first time I've ever been to Mod Pizza and not had to wait it in the line. We went right to ordering our pizza. there were 4 people waiting at the pizza counter to take our order. One very nice girl who I told my fake name to was there, and she didn't know how to spell it, but she was very sweet. And then she passed it to another person who put the sauce on. Then she passed it to another person who put the toppings on, because I get the Mad Dog, because let's face it, meat on pizza is just excellent. And then I add jalapenos because I like heat on my pizza. And another person moved it to the table where another person loaded it into the oven. That's a lot of people to make one pizza.
What was your fake name?
Jamal, it always is. I like making people.
How do you spell it?
Jamal.
Jamal.
Or
That's
you
easy.
can use Jamal.
Yeah, no, it was the castle. The best though,
Jaymall.
yeah, or just unique and then UNIQEE. Unique. I can do it that way too. All right, so. And it's always funny because whenever I give that Chili's or another restaurant, if they're really busy, Jamal, and here I come the whitest guy ever walking up. I'm that's me. My wife hates it. She hates when I do that. So I do it all the time. And Tyrone is another one.
Jay Quellen, right?
Yeah. But see, you can't go think of it commonly, when one you gotta give it something. All right, so that's my thing at a restaurant, and sometimes the servers have a really good sense of humor about it, sometimes they don't. So anyways, going back to this, so that's a lot of people, so as you can imagine, diminishing returns sets in a lot, because think about the additional cost of that extra worker, right, where 1 or 2 workers could easily have done that. Now again, it was right before the dinner rush, so I think I hit the beginning of a shift. But think about how many additional costs that Mod Pizza incurred by simply just having too many people there, right? And the additional revenue for my pizza wasn't probably offsetting to that at that time. Now, again, because it's so up and down, restaurant times and busyness is so up and down, it'll end up evening out. But the diminishing return sets in right away, okay? Because the additional cost, right, will continue to go up the more you make, the more quantity you make. And then your marginal revenue will begin, in this case, it's going to stay steady at the price. So just looking at your marginal cost line, however, though, when diminishing, it makes sense. When diminishing returns sets in, at that point where you're making more just at a slower rate, it makes sense then that your marginal cost will go up because of that. Your cost of employing that additional worker will go up. All right, here we go. So this is basically what I said. Put that big old fat dot where MR equals MC. Okay, that should be the very first thing you do. I think another helpful thing to do, because again, everything kind of stems from this, is following that down to whatever quantity it is and circling it. That, again, that's helpful. Some of you won't need to do that because some of you will just naturally see it. But I think as you're learning it, it's just kind of helpful to do. Because then everything else stems from that question. Because then the second question that normally is the business or the firm operating a loss, breaking even, or earning a profit? And you have to have those 2 elements, the quantity and the MR equals MC. So in this situation, if you follow the dotted line back up, you'll notice you hit the ATC line first, so it's profit. Or another way to think about it, if price is higher than your ATC at that quantity, then you're earning a profit. Either way, it's the same way of saying the exact same thing. Yeah.
So if you hit the MC for after the intersection, that shows your income loss.
Yeah. Exactly. Yep. All right, so you know that this price right here is your average total cost. Okay, this price right here is what the average total cost is. So as you're following that dotted line back up, you hit the ATC line. So that's your essentially, those are your total costs. This area, this box right here are your total costs. And we'll get to that. I'll kind of explain that a little bit more. Okay, now I draw a different perfectly competitive graph. Same deal though, ATC lower than price. So I draw it like this so. Because I'm going to be using the labeling on the graph to explain various things.
Wait, so the box is what? Sorry.
We'll get to it. So it's not important, like, wait till the next one to label it, but it's gonna be your cost, if you really wanna know. Yeah.
Quick question on the MC, marginal cost,
Yeah.
above price, when do you know when it's becoming like not a profit or like negative and all that stuff?
Like you're incurring a loss, it all depends on ETC, where your ETC is. Because marginal cost will always increase the more output, because variable cost, right, and because of the theory of production, because you're increasing the number of people that are working, and you have to pay them. Funny thing about people is they like getting paid. So, so that Sam, that the marginal cost will continue to increase.
We need to put like A and C on our.
Yeah, the reason why I want you to put that is because I'm going to use that labeling in order to explain like the area of profit, the area of loss, total cost, total revenue, and all that kind of stuff. All right, we've already talked about that. This is what we just left on the last slide. So because your price is higher than your average total cost, you're earning a profit. So the graph you see right there is a perfectly competitive firm earning a profit. I thought you were talking about black helicopters. Time to get your tinfoil hat on. All right. So anytime the ATC line is drawn like that, there you go. There's your profit, your firm earning a profit. Anybody remember that tricky formula for total revenue? The one I said was going to come up like time times Q. P times Q.
Total revenue is profit minus or plus total cost.
That's profit, yeah.
I don't know, I just switched them.
Oh, okay. So total revenue is price times quantity. You can actually find total revenue on here. Price times a quantity.
Wow.
All right, so it's that whole box right there. Okay, now again, you decide whether the labeling that you've put is sufficient enough, or if you'd like to shade it, it's that whole box. But then if you shade it, you have to draw another graph, so that's what I have to do. Again, I'm gonna just tell you this, the more you draw these graphs, the more repetitive it is, the better and easier this stuff becomes. So as I was learning it, and even when I was like beginning teaching this, I drew these graphs like constantly. Now I'm really good at drawing the ETC at the lowest point, yeah.
Like the profit box, is it PACB?
So the entire thing is PAQO.
Yeah, but it's like profit, 'cause that's total revenue, right?
Yeah, that's your total revenue.
But
We'll get to profit.
PACB.
Profit is, yeah, PBCA, yeah. We'll get to that. The reason why I'm giving you this, again, we're walking through it slow, and I understand a lot of you guys kind of get this, but what ends up happening is that the writers of the FRQs and the multiple choice are really, really skilled at saying, all right, you get the big picture stuff, now let's go backwards into the simpler down in the weeds stuff and see if you understand that. And you wouldn't be surprised, because the reason why they do that is that really differentiates people from just simply memorizing what graphs look like to actually understanding their function. And if you're trying to separate a 3 or 4 or 4 and a 5, that's how you do it. Like if you have the graphs memorized and you can just regurgitate graphs, there's a good chance you end up with a 3 on the exam. But you're like, sweet, all I have to do is memorize all the graphs. A little bit harder to do in micro than it is in macro. But no. But if you want like the 4 or the 5, now that's what they'll do. They'll start to dissect it. And usually it's the simpler stuff that people miss. All right, so what's the formula for total cost? If you have your average total cost, I already gave it. If you have your ATC, because it's drawn on here, how do you find average total cost? Total cost divided by quantity gives you your ATC, right?
Just multiply it by 1.
There you go. So you multiply your ATC times quantity.
Where along the ATC?
Excellent question, and that's why I like the way that this is drawn, so I didn't draw my own. That's going to be where C is. So you do, here I'm going to So I should have picked a different color. But it's this rectangle right here, okay? That BOQC1 is your cost, well, how much it costs to produce that product, your total cost for that product. And again, because we're an economics class and not accounting class, that's going to include opportunity cost. When we say total cost, we're including opportunity costs in the econ class. If you're in an accounting class, it'd be like, well, that's your building, and it's your people, and it's your capital equipment, all right? But they don't like, well, what if is the person better off farming, or are they better off teaching? And then my dorky brother, accountant brother, would be like, well, I don't know, let's see the spreadsheet. Well, no, he doesn't know because he doesn't take into account opportunity cost. All right, so since the box for your total revenue, right, P times Q, is bigger than the box for your total cost, B times Q, your total revenue is greater than your total cost.
Wait, what?
Okay, because this box is bigger than this box.
So cool.
The total revenue, yeah, here we go.
It's a little extra.
Does the total cost box just like hit the very bottom of the ATC?
So it's where Q, yeah, I didn't answer Sam's question that he asked, and then you're asking the same question, so a good one. It's where your Q, you start going up from MR equals MC, so then you circle that Q. And you start going back up to ATC, it's where the Q hits the ATC line.
Oh, okay, so it could be further over.
Sure, yeah, and so let's say there, Mr. Dark line is even higher, so it hits MC like over here.
Yeah,
Right.
it could be like,
Then-
then like tons of
like
costs.
smack it
We
back
have like
down.
big total cost of schools.
Next by John.
Well, in that case, then
We
your
probably-
ATC line probably, you're probably up here, but your profit,
Your
It's
profit
up
probably,
here. Exactly.
That makes sense, because if you were,
The price was higher, you'd be earning it. You'd be making more, which means your costs would go up. Like you'd be making more of the product, your costs would go up. But your revenue would also go up.
and this one, if your quantity goes way down,
Yeah,
then
yeah, if your Mr. Dark line goes lower because of the market, which we're gonna do an example of that, because of the market, then your profit's gonna get shrunk into
or
it.
even at this price,
So bad.
or at this price, if the quantity moved way over.
Yeah, but the quantity wouldn't move way over unless MC or MR moves, right? Because it's your profit. And there will be a situation where that happens. So hold on to that, because you're talking about now per unit taxes and subsidies, so we'll talk about that. All right, so that box that's remained shaded is your area of profit right there. Of economic profit, Because what we've done is we've taken out your total cost. Okay, that's why that's now white. And we've kept that area that's left over of your total revenue. And that's how you figure out profit, right? You take your total revenue, subtract it from your total cost, and you have profit, which is exactly what we've done on the graph. All right, now we're going to talk about what happens. So this is a firm earning an economic profit in the short run. So let's just, I think I told you guys about this. It may have been the other class I was complaining about. But I was listening to a podcast that talked about, we were talking about corn. So we'll continue to talk about corn here. But let's say that you were listening to the same podcast as I was, and it's all about how we've demonized gluten, and how that if you have Crohn's, that's a good thing to cut gluten from your diet. If you don't have Crohn's, it's actually really bad to do that. The fat content in gluten-free stuff, because you're not getting it through the gluten, as well as the calorie intake is higher. So what people have seen is people on Crohn's have lost a ton of weight because they've cut gluten out of their diet. And so people are like, sweet, that's a good diet. It's a bad thing to do that for your diet. Okay, of course, moderation and everything, but he was talking about that. But because people don't realize that, they then just see that people on Crohn's have lost a lot of weight. So now we see for gluten-free stuff. And because of that now, farmers aren't planting as much wheat in their farmland. Instead, they're planting things like corn and soy that go into gluten-free things, right? So let's say that that's happening. So you see Farmer Joe is earning a big profit. And you're like, Farmer Joe is doing it. I can too. And a lot of other people are saying the same thing. And so And because there are economic profits now, that entices or incentivizes people to go into that particular business. In this case, it's going to be corn manufacturing.
Also, it's Russia undercutting the beef prices.
Sure, you can, but let's blame the Russians for everything, right? So they're over there, everything else except for drinking vodka, right? So in the long run now, people begin to start to do the calculation in their head, saying like, they're making money doing this. Maybe I should do that. And so more and more people come into producing that product. That sure sounds like a determinant of supply, which is?
Size of the market.
That is not a determinant of supply.
Dang it.
Number of producers.
There you go, number of
That's what I was
producers.
trying to
One
said
person
size of the
heeded my
producers.
warning as far as failing this class if you don't know the determinants. So more people, number of producers increase. That pushes supply to the right, to the right, to the right. Now I'm going to say that that's the last line you want to draw because it's really, the graders are really particular on where your new Mr. DARP line is going to be. It's better to draw the Mr. DARP line first and make sure that the supply line adds up to it, which we'll get to tomorrow because we are out of time. So for tomorrow, make sure that you print off the problem set because you're going to have time to practice it.